Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this call organized by MergerSight and UCL M&A. I'm Lucas, one of the founders of MergerSight, and I have the pleasure today to host this call together with Pristy, also a member of MergerSight and studying at UCL. Pristy?
Hi everyone, I'm Pristy. So yeah, as Lucas said, I'm in my second year right now studying economics at UCL. I'm head of healthcare at the UCL M&A group, and I'm also an analyst at MergerSight.
Cool. We have a very special guest today, Bob Wigley. Bob, who has had a fantastic career in finance and has held multiple positions in business, and just recently published the book Born Digital, the story of a distracted generation. Bob will first talk a bit about his experience in finance, the positions he's held in business, and then obviously dedicate some of his time to present his book and to engage in some of the conversations with us. Before we get started, I would say I'd just give you a brief overview of Bob's legacy. Bob is now the chairman of UK Finance. He's also the chairman of Vesta Global Holdings and also the chairman of Bing and non-executive director also of Symphony Environmental, the Queen's Club, also very active in the voluntary sector, John's Ambulance, obviously also board member of Cancer Research UK and many other positions. In the past, he has been chairman of Victoria Beckham Limited, chairman of Global Trust Bank, and then also obviously Merrill Lynch, chairman of Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and many, many more positions. I hope I focus on some of the most important ones, Bob. Obviously, recently he published now his book, Born Digital, where he really focuses on three key points. The first one, the differences in the generations. So we have the Gen Z on the one hand, millennials, and everything that came before. I always forget those names. So everything essentially younger than millennials.
Baby boomers.
Exactly, yeah. How they differ in terms of how we socialize, how we live, essentially in what kind of different worlds we all live. Second point, then Generation Z. And finally, then about the need to regulate big tech companies, which I found particularly interesting. All right, Bob, thanks again for being with us. A pleasure. Obvious first starting point is, you started, I think, back in 83 or 84 after graduating from Bristol and started your career in finance and business. And obviously a strong supporter of capitalism, free markets. So how come you now, I'm a strong opponent of regulation? How did it all start and how did you get there?
Okay, so let me talk a little bit about the career, the companies I invested in, and then I'll come back to your question about why I'm writing about regulation for big techs. Excuse me, hay fever is terrible today. So very briefly, I started out life at actually it was Bath University, although I lived in Bristol. Did a degree in business. Then I trained as an accountant with Arthur Andersen, as then was. I then joined a British merchant bank called Morgan Grenfell. I was there for 10 years, then moved to Merrill Lynch. I was there for 16. And for the last 6 years, as you mentioned, I was the chairman of Europe, Middle East and Africa. So I had 9,000 people in 23 countries and a balance sheet of about $500 billion of gross assets. That's roughly a third of Merrill Lynch's global balance sheet. So very large business indeed. We had $300 billion of institutional money under management, $50 billion of people's money under management with private wealth management business, and then a massive global markets and investment banking business. During that time, I was part of the group that kind of identified how badly things were going to go in the financial markets. And I was talking to the Prime Minister and the Chancellor about it. And they then asked me to join the board of the Bank of England. So for the period leading up to the financial crisis, and the crisis itself, I sat on the board of the Bank of England and actually its audit committee, which played a very important role in dealing with the support for other banks in the system during that period. I left banking when Bank of America took over Merrill Lynch in 2009. And since then, I've been working in a variety of public and private company roles, but mainly backing young entrepreneurs. And today I have about 6 or 7 businesses that I either chair or I am a director of or work with in a variety of fields, and I'll talk about those in a minute. Just to mention a few other interesting things along the way, when I was chairman of Merrill Lynch, Boris Johnson, who at that point was mayor of London, asked me to, but of course now is prime minister, asked me to chair a group of CEOs from the financial services sector to write what has become a sort of seminal report on the future of London winning in the decade ahead. And there we looked at why London had been so successful as a global financial centre over many decades, and what it would take to keep us at the forefront of global financial centres. Later on, 2 or 3 years later, the Chancellor of the Exchequer at the time, George Osborne, asked me to chair a group which became known as the Green Investment Bank Commission, which basically wrote the template to set up the world's first green investment bank, which the government then did as part of the coalition agreement. And that bank was formed. It ran successfully with the government capital, crowded in a lot of investments to the renewable sector, and then, as you'll probably know, was privatised a couple of years back. So throughout my career, I've always been involved with government as well, and it's that combination plus working with young entrepreneurs that makes life so interesting. So turning quickly to the companies, I've invested in a range of companies, usually with cutting edge technology or that are involved in the sustainability space. So taking the last first, one of the companies I'm a director of is Simply Environmental. We have 2 fascinating products, but the most interesting is a polymer that you put in plastic when you manufacture it that basically causes the plastic to become oxo-biodegradable after its useful life. So what that means is that you can say to a bit of plastic, let's say you're a plastic bag, you can live for 3 months, but when you get to the point where we don't need you anymore, you need to disappear. And we implant into the plastic a mechanism for it to self-destruct, but in a way that it returns to natural material in the environment. And this is a cure for plastic litter, basically, both on land and in the sea. So this is obviously highly topical and very interesting. Today it's a relatively small company, but I'm very hopeful that it'll be a bigger one, and that's why I'm working with them. Elsewhere in the portfolio, I have a fascinating cutting-edge video software as a service business. It's going to completely redefine the way hyper-personalized video is produced. So at the moment, if Facebook puts up a video on its channel, on its platform, basically it's storing every video that it sends to every one of its users separately to record the personalization. What our new technology does is only assembles the personalization on your phone at the moment you watch the video. So it pulls real-time data from your phone, from your other apps, from accounts you may have with the company that's sending you the video, and presents a video that will say not simply "Dear user," but "Dear Lucas." It will have your account balance on live on the screen in the corner, and that will disappear again the moment you've watched it. So there is no video to store. This is important for 2 reasons. Firstly, it means you're watching something very personal to you with the relevant data to your both hyper-personalized and hyper-contextualized. That's the other point. So if you're in Japan, it will be in Japanese. If you're in Japan, the products that come up in the video may be different from the ones if you're watching it in London. So this is genuinely groundbreaking technology, and I think it's going to be fascinating. That company is called Secure Broadcast. So there are just a couple of examples. I could talk about a lot of the others. If we come to the book, so why did I write the book, you asked? Well, partly, watching my own 3 adolescent children growing up and noticing how differently they use technology from the way my generation does, and how that had affected the development of their personalities and their view of the world. And then secondly, a couple of years ago, I adopted a New Year's resolution to meet a new Generation Z entrepreneur every business day. And in fact, Lucas, you were one of them. I've now met, little though did you know, perhaps that you were part of an experiment that was going to lead to the writing of a book. I've now met over 200, and it was really meeting those 200 youngsters that confirmed my view that Generation Z, your generation, doesn't represent incremental change from mine, but fundamental change across a whole range of factors, partly facilitated by technology, but not completely. And I think recognizing that many people my age haven't realized how massive that change is, I wanted to explore and record what I'd learned. So what is the book about? Well, it's about the fact that I think society's collective attention has been neurologically hijacked by what I call a tsunami of tech devices and apps that dominate all our attention, largely in the pursuit of the profit of a relatively small number of very large tech businesses, who, it seems to me, have too little regard to the sustainability of their business models and need to find a better balance between making a profit for their shareholders and looking after society. Now, I'm not against technology, and I'm certainly not negative about Generation Z, just so we understand each other. There are massive benefits to technology, and they've become ubiquitous in every aspect of our life over the last 10 years, transforming the ease with which we gather information, the way we educate ourselves, the way we shop, the way we entertain ourselves, the way we get jobs, the way we politic, the way we observe our religions, and start, build, and run businesses. But in the same decade that these technologies have become ubiquitous in our lives, so adolescent well-being has declined very substantially. In fact, unhappiness, loneliness, sleep deficit, anxiety, depression, and sadly even self-harm and suicide, collectively I will refer to these as the negative factors, have all risen for the Gen Z cohort relative to previous generations very substantially. And whilst I'm not suggesting for a second that technology is the sole cause, and nor does the academic evidence support that, I have, for example, learned that all screen time is not equal. So if you are in a focused way watching a film, or in a focused way educating yourself, and not, by the way, simultaneously looking at Instagram, sending people messages on Facebook Messenger or Snapchat, you are doing something focused for a reasonable period of time, that's all good. If you are chilling and scrolling on Instagram for 4 hours between 10 o'clock at night and 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm not sure that is so good for you. Yeah. I'm also not sure that spending 5 hours a day gaming is very good for you either, but I'll come back to those later. And the second thing is, not only is not all screen time equal, but all users are not equal. So there are some people who are naturally resilient, who are not so badly affected by what they see on the internet, as they wouldn't have been affected by something bad that might have happened in the offline world. But there are many people who do find the negativity of social media a problem, and it's those people that we need to protect. The next point is that young people are getting devices earlier and earlier in their lives and spending more and more time on them. As one academic said, children have taken to tablets like ducks to water. Now, why is that a particular problem? Well, it's a particular problem because, of course, when you're a child, your brain is still developing. And the way that young children now develop in the online world, or what we call cyber socialize, compared to the way we did it in mainly the offline world, reduces the opportunity for children to bond with their parents and indeed bond with their friends and to develop empathy. And I think that, combined with the related societal trends like the decline in the nuclear family, the decline of religion, the decline in marriage, the decline in communal eating, actually, which is a big one. Your generation likes to eat on the go, take food on the go, or if it is sitting with other people eating, you're probably on your devices at the same time. It's not a focused communal conversation. So I think technology systematically, if not intentionally, but systematically, in fact, attacks or at least interrupts all the places where my generation would have developed empathy. And I think that's partly why society seems so much more polarized than in recent history. So is it just me that thinks this? Am I just some, old fart, rambling on about the new generation not being as good as the old one? And that, by the way, is not what I think at all. I'll come back to how positive I am about Generation Z in a minute. I'm not against technology. I'm against what some technology does to some children. That's the point. No, of course, I'm not the only person. The majority of parents and many educators in particular are very concerned about potentially harmful effects of technology on kids. And indeed, a high proportion of your generation themselves, including some that I met in the interviews that I did, say that you've had early exposure to harmful content. You acknowledge that you've been cyberbullied or worse. And it's very clear from the surveys that a majority of the public want to see the internet better regulated. And indeed, only at the end of last year, the US Senate Committee on Antitrust said at the end of the year that the antitrust regime in the United States had failed society in allowing the rapid rise to domination of a small number of what are now known as the FANGs. So to sort of bring this summary to an end, what my book does is explore the potential solutions to all of this. So these include actions that your generation could take themselves to reduce this distraction, the effect of what I call weapons of mass distraction, to reduce the harm that's being caused, and what parents and educators could do to better engage with children about their online lives and to discuss with them and explain to them the risks of being online and the risks of online relationships. What the software design industry could do to incorporate safety by design into the product development process, what big tech could do to find a better balance between profit and societal purpose, And ultimately then what I think regulators need to do to require big tech to protect users, particularly children, from potential online harms. I think in conclusion, we need a combination of national legislation around the world and then global internet governance, in which context it's interesting to note the UN Secretary General earlier this year appointed his first ever tech envoy to rapidly advance international coordination of attempts to improve global internet governance. So that's kind of the summary. There's much more in the book. Most of it, I would say, positive about your generation, about my experience of your generation, but also recognizing the dangers of digital overload and the actions that you can take to detox and improve safety by design. I probably said enough, so let me stop there and then we'll get into Q&A.
Thank you so much for that. Your background is truly incredible, and I think your book raises some really important issues that we definitely need to discuss. So yeah, we're going to go into some questions regarding some of the topics that you bring up in your book. So you briefly mentioned this before, but bullying, cyberbullying, trolling, they're all big issues that society is currently facing at the moment. 30% of secondary school students video live with someone that they don't know, and 5% of those are required to undress. I mean, those are clearly unacceptable figures. And when I was in secondary school, I did experience a bit of relationship teaching, but I think there's still a long way to go. So I know that you're a strong supporter of changes in the national curriculum, teaching young students the important differences between online and offline relationships. So what role do you think that the government needs to play in this?
Well, the short answer to that is a big one. Let me pick up on a few things you've said. First of all, a couple of reasons why this happens. So when I was growing up, if you wanted to play in the house, that was fine. If you wanted to play in the back garden or go down to the high street, you probably had to have an elder brother with you or a friend or an adult. We let our children go to their bedrooms and, in inverted commas, play on the internet, okay? And we have, frankly, no clue what they're doing. But because they're in the home, we assume they're safe. The problem with that assumption, of course, is the internet is not in the home. And the internet is inhabited by some very nasty, grubby people. It's also got some lovely people on it. Sadly, it's got the other variety as well. So one of the things I encourage parents to do is to talk to their children about what they're doing online and to explain to them, whilst the internet in theory is in the home, it's actually not in the home, and who might be inhabiting and what their objectives might be. So that's step number one. The second thing to say is that one of the reasons this can happen is because we allow anonymity on the web. Okay, so you can sign up under a false profile, and indeed your profile on whatever platform you want to be in could be in my name or someone else's name or an imaginary name. Now, why is that a problem? It's a problem because if you enter into any of those types of behavior, cyberbullying or child sexual abuse, God forbid, or simply transferring hate speech or fake news, and some other user complains to the platform about you, if the platform doesn't know who you are, there's very little they can do about it. I mean, they can temporarily block you or permanently block your profile, but you just go and open a new one in your name or from a new email address. They can't report you to law enforcement because they don't know how to get hold of you. So I don't understand why it is when, if you want to go and buy alcohol, you need an ID card. If you want to gamble, you need an ID card. If you want to travel on an airplane, you need an ID card. Why would we allow children or adults, frankly, to roam around the internet on a completely anonymous basis? It makes no sense to me. And I think that's something we've really got to address. So to your final point of your question, what can the government do about it? Well, they're actually, in this country, they're bringing in this year something called the Online Harms Bill. That is a new act of parliament that will, for the first time ever, place upon the big tech companies a statutory duty of care to have regard to the harms that their products and services might cause. In other words, Instagram, Facebook will have to think about what impact on 16-year-olds or 13-year-olds access to their services might have. And if they think there could be harms in the areas we've discussed, they then, they then need to take actions to mitigate those harms. And Ofcom, the media regulator, will have the job of assessing whether the actions taken are sufficient. And if not, they'll be able to fine the big tech companies very substantially. So this is groundbreaking legislation globally. There's nothing like it in existence. And over a period of time, I think it could make a big difference.
Thanks for that point, Bob. I actually want to build on that, on the Online Harms Bill. I totally share, that it's groundbreaking and that many countries are far behind that, and that the UK is definitely a first mover, similar to Australia, for instance, just recently. But at the same time, the question I have is, if you establish a statutory duty of care, already in real life, it's sometimes quite difficult, obviously, to establish whether someone has fallen below the standard of care. But I would argue that it's easier to do so if you drive a car and need to decide whether someone was negligible in driving that car relative to the online world, where you have so many nuances and so many different aspects that you need to consider, essentially. So do you think we might potentially open the floodgates in the courts, or where's the line between, inappropriate content and harmful content, essentially, which you would consider falling below the standard of care?
So that's a really interesting question. And the way I think about it is a bit like this. We had the Industrial Revolution. We then had lots of factories with people using dangerous machinery. It took a long time for the government to introduce what we now know as health and safety legislation, which put on employers the responsibility to protect their employees from dangerous equipment, amongst other things.
Yeah.
And I see the online harms bill a bit like the online equivalent of health and safety legislation. It's saying, okay, if you want to put this stuff out there, you need to think what impact it can have on your users. And if it's going to harm them, you better watch out, because we'll be coming after you. So that's how I see it. Now, is it more nuanced than health and safety? Yes, certainly than driving a car, although you'd be amazed how many accidents it's very difficult to tell whose fault it was. Having been in a few myself, that definitely weren't my fault, but unable to prove it was someone else's. Although interestingly, the cameras you can now have in your dash are quite helpful in that respect, assuming it's the other guy's fault. But yes, you're right. I think online it's going to be harder. It's going to be harder, but it's not going to be impossible. And so this will be an iterative process of learning, where Ofcom will make some judgments and we'll see how it plays out. But it's better than not having it. And I think in the same way that health and safety legislation has developed over the last 50 years, so no doubt the online harms concept will also develop as the regulators get more skilled in working out what really works.
Right. And in terms of who should make that criteria, so I think you emphasized the point that at the moment, obviously, the government just defines a criteria, right, that companies need to take into account. It's pretty. It's
not criteria. It's identifying the harms.
Right.
So it will have a list of things like cyberbullying, porn, those kind of things, and it will then be up to the big techs to decide whether their products could cause those things.
Right.
And if they do, what they should do about it. And then Ofcom will have the job of assessing whether the actions taken by the big techs are sufficient.
Right, cool. I mean, another point of the legislation package, I think, is the personal responsibility, the personal liability of executives, right? So for the first time, executives of tech companies can be held personally liable for their actions or for failing to mitigate harm. Now, obviously...
That's a really interesting point that you raised, Lucas, because in health and safety legislation, it did not used to be the case that directors of companies could be held liable personally. It was only the company. Yeah. And inevitably, therefore, some directors didn't take it as seriously.
Yeah.
When it became apparent that this might be a way of focusing people's minds on looking after their employees, the government decided to make it one of the very few areas in law where company directors are personally accountable for health and safety. And it has definitely had an impact. I've seen it myself on how companies look at these issues. And in fact, I've just become chairman of a new company. The very first thing I said at the very first board meeting I went to is I like to see on the agenda, the very first item is always a health and safety report. What's happened in the last month? Have we had any what we call slips, trips and falls? If we did, how did they happen? What action have we taken? How do we know this isn't going to happen again? And that's because, as a director of any company, I can be held liable if someone has an accident, on our watch, as I would say. So in this act, right now, they've said they will not be holding big tech executives personally liable, although they reserve the right if within 2 years the company hasn't taken sufficient action to review that position. Yeah. I personally think that's weak. It's obviously as a result of lobbying from the big tech sector.
Yeah.
But in banking, we are now, have the concept of senior managers who are listed individuals who are personally accountable. Interestingly, in, I think it's China, where they have some kinds of content which are forbidden on the internet, including things like porn. Again, they have the concept of personal accountability for named individuals in big tech companies. So this is not a unique concept, and I regret that UK has not gone that whole way, but maybe it will in due course.
So you don't think it might backfire because he just raised by himself, right? Other than the Health and Safety Act, and other than voidable transactions, fraudulent trading, etc., directors cannot really be held liable. And that's the purpose of the whole corporate veil, right, of separate legal personality. So you don't think that anyone might get so scared that they leave the space entirely
well, you know, that the argument that these companies have used is if you over-regulate the UK, we will decide it's uncompetitive to operate there. Yeah. Are you seriously suggesting that Facebook is going to withdraw from the UK or Instagram is going to withdraw? I don't think so. Yeah. And, you know, frankly, the few companies that have benefited from COVID have been the FANGs. Their profits have gone up dramatically. Their market caps have gone up dramatically. They're making, you know, what I would call unsustainably high super profits, in my humble opinion. And if we force them to reinvest a few £1 million a year in better protecting their users, I think that would be a good use of some of that profit.
That's great. Thank you for that. So moving on slightly, you sort of touched on age-appropriate design codes a bit earlier. So I've actually noticed some platforms have started being more strict with age verification. So before, when you just had to tick a box claiming that you're 18, now you have to, you know, show proof, maybe scan your ID, things like that. So what sort of content do you think should be available for people of certain ages? And what do you think about the practicalities of having a sort of age-appropriate design code?
Wow, that's such a big question. So what you're referring to, again, is the second part of the UK government's attempt to deal with these issues by bringing in this age-appropriate design code, which will say to the big tech platforms, you have to have regard to the age of your users and the kind of content that you make available to them when you're considering, you know, the online harms that we've referred to. Now, there's one big problem here where I have some, but not total sympathy with the big tech industry, which is it's actually quite difficult sometimes to tell the age of a user because, unfortunately, in the same way, children lie about their ages. Unfortunately, quite a lot of parents aid and abet their children by either allowing, with their knowledge, the child to lie about their age, or actually lying about it themselves, or giving permission to the child to have a profile in their name. Okay, this is not a small thing. This is a very widespread practice, so not good. From the platform's point of view, what they have developed techniques to do is to use maybe one picture or one piece of voice text to try and make an estimation of your age. Unfortunately, that is not very good at detecting the difference between under and over 13s, particularly in boys where there's a voice break issue, obviously, or indeed under and over 16, where children tend to be in a state of development. So, you know, you can be an 18-year-old and look 14, you can be a 14-year-old and look 22. I mean, you know what I mean? It just, it's very tricky. It's both picture and voice. So I'm working with a company. We just filed a patent on a new multimodal dynamic private age assurance mechanism. What that means is, sounds like a lot of words. It means that sitting on the keyboard of the phone, inside the phone, right, and without any data leaving the phone itself with an app, through an AI-based app, will look at many pictures of you. So if you're on TikTok, every time you take a video, it will take out 3 or 4 frames from that video. Okay, if you're speaking on the phone or sending a video with voice, it will take out short extracts from the voice, and it will look at many pictures, many pieces of voice, and it will triangulate between what the pictures and the voice are telling it to increase the probability of knowing your age. And so while one picture and one piece of voice might give you 50-60% charge of probability of assessing age, less so if you're in the difficult category of 13 to 18, with these new techniques, we can probably put it in the high 90% of chance of getting it right. And that's a real breakthrough, or will be a breakthrough, when we can industrialize it. And what I'd like to see is big tech companies adopting those technologies so that, and I'll come back to the words I used, it's multimodal, meaning it's not one picture or one piece of voice, it's several. It's dynamic in the sense that it's happening all the time. So, for example, if you get your brother who looks older than you to stare at the screen while it's doing the test, and he's 16, you're 13. As soon as he walks away, you've now got into the platform because the platform thinks you're 16, but actually you're 13. The platform will actually know, because a minute later it'll take a new picture and it'll realize that it's been fooled. Okay, so it's dynamic. And the third thing is private, meaning nothing leaves the laptop or leaves the phone. It stays within the app, and you don't have to worry that your pictures are sitting on some Facebook or Instagram server somewhere where they may, get stolen, hacked, or misused. So this is a very exciting development, and that's what I'd like to see industrialized as soon as possible.
Cool. I would like to move on a bit and talk about user-generated content. So obviously, Section 230 in the US basically says that companies cannot be held liable and responsible for user-generated content. But as most of the viewers probably know, at the moment in the US, we're very much in debate whether that should be repealed. And Australia, as I touched upon initially, has made a similar move. So Facebook now needs to, not about the user-generated content, but Facebook needs to pay for
engineers, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So Australia definitely becoming more strict. And the question now is, where does that lead us? Do you think Section 230 should be repealed? What do you think will be the consequences of that? What are your thoughts on that?
I'm not sure actually what I think about Section 230 being repealed, because that is a massive move, which completely changes the role of the platforms from being a hosting platform for user-generated content to becoming a publisher. Right? If you literally abolish it, I think that's what it means. What I would like to see is better content moderation. Now that's easy to say and hard to do. And again, here I have some sympathy with the big tech platforms, who, by the way, are investing more and more in attempting to moderate content. So whilst they're, on the one hand, holding out that they basically don't really moderate content to any great degree, it's the platform is there for you to post, and provided you don't breach their community guidelines, anything goes. In fact, they are becoming more and more stringent about what they post. And I think it's an interesting debate whether you can simultaneously take down an elected president's social media feed, and on the other hand, in the other half of your mouth, argue that you are a platform for hosting user content, not a publisher. They seem to be totally inconsistent positions. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. There are all sorts of issues around content moderation. There's, by the way, if anybody's interested in the subject, there's a very good book called Behind the Screen, which is a book all about content moderation. In particular, it goes into the effects it has on the people that do it. Now, there are, particularly in the Far East and Latin America, where there are lots of low-paid people who are prepared to do this kind of work, massive sheds full of people looking at pictures of body parts, hate speech, the most horrible things that might appear on the web, and deciding whether they meet their particular platform's content guidelines. It's a fascinating book, which, as you can imagine, looks at the effects on those people of sitting 8 hours a day looking at porn and hate speech, and worse, self-harm, suicide, all sorts of other really tricky subjects. So I think in this context, we need, again, a combination of national government regulation, because content moderation will vary dramatically by culture. What's acceptable in the UK would not be acceptable in some more religious countries. And there are other factors at play in other countries where that wouldn't be a problem in the UK. So I think it has to be national, but also I think the UN here has an initiative under the Internet Governance Forum to try and bring in some standardization of general principles of content moderation globally. So you need a combination of the two. Incredibly difficult subject. I'm not sure I would go as far as repealing Section 230, but I do think we need better, more standardized content moderation, and we need the big techs to step up in terms of investment to really weed out the worst forms of content.
Great, thank you. So moving on a bit onto distractions, I think you estimated that if we only spent half an hour a week less on social media platforms and spent that time working instead, GDP could be greater by £15 billion. Although that is
55-0, yeah.
55. That's huge. I know I've fell to the distractions of social media as well. And so what do you think Gen Z should do about that? And most importantly, looking at the societal damage that has been caused, what do you think government should do about that?
So it's difficult. So if you, as someone said, if you have on one side of a screen a partially developed adolescent brain, and on the other side of the screen you have 100 of the world's best neuroscientists who've devoted their working lives to addicting you to whatever the products or services you're looking at, it's not really a fair fight, is it? And I think that's fundamentally true. So you can try and detox yourself by taking yourself off social media. You can try and, frankly, the best thing to do is simply put your phone somewhere else. If you're trying to do anything that requires concentration, simply put your phone out of your sight, because otherwise the temptation to pick up on a buzz or a ping or a flash is too great. And the reason it's too great is because it's designed to be too great. I mean, these are all the interventions that are designed to attract our attention and to retain our attention, and they are designed deliberately to promote compulsive or overuse or addiction, depending on what you want to call it. So I think the first thing is individuals can take steps themselves to simply remove the distraction. And then, as I said, we can use education we could have a part of the national curriculum called responsible internet use, which just explains to children at school the issues around distraction and what it might do to their studies and ultimately their success in life. I mean, there's some very interesting statistics about the decline of reading and how reading is important to subsequent life chances that are quite shocking. So there are things individuals can do. There are things parents and educators can do. I'm not sure in relation to distraction itself, there's much governments can do. I mean, I think that is more a matter for us and our parents.
I want to again build on that, Bob. So you just raised the point of addiction, obviously, and I would say algorithms certainly play a crucial role in exacerbating that. So I think for everybody, it's just extremely difficult nowadays even to agree on what the facts are, right? In the past, I guess you have had your discussions about the same facts and you saw it from a different perspective, but now you sit on a table and you don't know actually what the numbers are, right? The correct numbers are, sometimes at least. In fact, today also I was just in the morning looking at my network analytics module, and I was reading about Facebook's engineers who are able to essentially predict your partner based on just your total number of friends. And they do that just by looking at the dispersion of your mutual friends. So without looking at any other data points, they're able to have 55-60% accuracy of who your partner is of those 1,500 friends. So if we put that in perspective and add a few more data points, where does it leave us? Like, do we need to change the algorithms? Do we need to make the algorithms more transparent? Or what is your suggestion? So maybe that the users can decide on the algorithm, or what do you think?
So there are really three different points that you've raised there, which I'll try and unpack a little bit. So one is news algorithms tend to send you more news of the news that you've watched before.
Yeah.
So if you like reading a particular, let's say you read The Economist, you'll get more bits of The Economist, for example, right? If you like The Guardian, you'll get more bits of The Guardian, simply put. Not necessarily the source of the news, but it's more about the type of news and the subject matter of your news and your perspective on the news, right? So the problem with that is that you quickly find yourself in a filter bubble or echo chamber where you tend to read the same kind of thing over and over again, which reinforces your viewpoint. The problem is that it's different from the one that Pristy's looking at because she has different views, so she gets more of that, which comes back to the point you started with, which is when you sit down to have a conversation about politics, the news that Pristy has seen is different from the news you've seen because you're in a different algorithm. And therefore, on day one or minute one, when you sit down, you can't actually agree what the facts are that you're trying to analyze because you each have a different perspective from what you've read. Okay, and that is a problem. The second issue, which you're alluding to, is fake news, where someone is deliberately spreading false information. And unfortunately, as we know, social media facilitates that. that goes back partly to the anonymity point I raised earlier, which I think we should get rid of. So fake news is a massive problem on the internet. Where going back to your point about Section 230, publishers have a responsibility to verify their sources and verify the nature of the information they're publishing. Social media platforms don't. So that's why we get more fake news on social media. And what was? Oh yes, and then you talked. What was the third thing you went into the third area of algorithms? This is a slightly different area again.
It was more about basically predicting. The particular example was about predicting.
Oh yes, the partner. Okay. So yes, okay. So that's different because the platform is using an algorithm for its own benefit, not simply to deliver you something which you want, okay, or theoretically want.
Yeah.
So that's different. Now the problem with there are all sorts of problems with those kind of algorithms, but I guess the biggest one is bias. So you tend to find that because algorithms have been designed by middle-aged white men, or perhaps 27-year-old Ukrainian men, because that's where the code has come from, that there is inherent bias in the algorithm, depending on who wrote it, which is based on their own input to that algorithm. Simply put, I'm sort of not making the point very well, but you see what I'm saying. So what the EU has just done actually is produce a new set of codes and ethics around data ethics for algorithmic processes, in an attempt to remove that bias. And of course, they won't succeed in one go, but I think this is an initiative that is very important. In the UK, we have both the Turing Institute and the Oxford Internet Institute working on similar ideas. So you will hear a lot about data ethics over the next 10 to 20 years. It's probably going to be one of the most important philosophical and practical business subjects that you will come across.
Thank you. So I wanted to get your thoughts on the current workplace. So many big companies at the moment, they really want to bring their employees back into the office as soon as possible. But also we see loads of people who've really enjoyed remote working, especially with our generation that loves the flexibility that comes with remote working. So assuming we can't bring people back into the office anytime soon, to what extent do you think it's possible to build a successful culture virtually?
So I think the first thing to say is that your generation doesn't necessarily want to work in an office to start with. So let's put COVID on one side for a minute. Your generation is much more interested in what I call experiences, not jobs, and they expect their employers to provide them with remote working, with flexi time, with the ability to work from home, with a high degree of technological sophistication. So in other words, giving you a laptop, giving you an environment where you can do all the things I just said. And then when you are in the office, you're expecting a different environment maybe from the one I had. So you want a biophilic office that has thought about the environment and the way it's created. You're expecting technology around you. And indeed, you're expecting ideation tools and concierge tools to be AR and VR based, so that you simply talk at them and they give you the answer you need. You're not interested in long emails and form filling. So I think every aspect of what I call phygital workplaces, meaning digital physical workplaces, will be very different in the future. And when we have to frame any conversation about going back to the office, in inverted commas, in that context. Now, the good news is I think your generation, just as it doesn't see a difference between being online and offline, it's all one world, but essentially you're thinking online. So I don't think you'll see a big difference between being in the office in the way we would define that as being at work, and you being not in the office and being not at work. In other words, you'll just expect to work wherever you are, whether it's at home or in the office. And that could be very good for employers. My own experience of people that work from home and flexi time or job share is actually they work harder than people who spend a part of a day in the office and expect to do their work only during that period. So I don't think the implications are bad. I think they're potentially quite good. It'll just be very different from how it's been historically.
Great, thank you. So sort of moving on to recruitment, I've personally only had experience in finance recruitment, and I feel like over the years, that hasn't changed that much. So, you just hand in your CV, your cover letter, which you pre-write, and then you go through a set of interviews. That's pretty much the standard structure there. But more recently, we've seen more startups that are recruiting via Snapchat and TikTok and things like that. So do you believe that there are grounds for that? And do you see that being incorporated into more industries in the future?
Yeah, we've actually seen more than startups. We've seen McDonald's actually using what they call snapplications. So that's Snapchat for recruiting for the people who serve up their buns. And then Goldman Sachs actually has used TikTok to create short, snappy videos about what it's like working at Goldman Sachs. So there are two, enormous global companies that have used technology to improve the application process. But I think it's long overdue. One of the things I hear most when I have these meetings with people your age is how they've wasted hours and hours online filling in forms for internships or jobs, only 3 months later to get a 4-line email telling them they haven't got the job. With no ability to interact, no feedback. It's terrible, and we have to fix that. As employers, I think we owe it to your generation to be a little more imaginative in how we recruit you and in the feedback we give you. So yes, I think there's absolutely a place for it. I think it's coming. I think the most forward-looking employers are already doing it, and you'll see it grow rapidly.
I would like to move from a recruitment a bit to the future workplace in general. So I think we discussed how distracted Gen Z is, right? I think our generation is struggling a lot to focus on the task at hand. But at the same time, we see that automation pretty much removes all those mundane tasks, and we require a generation that is very much focused on the task and is able to work on complex tasks. So where do you think leaves us?
So I think one of my concerns at the end of the book is that one of the effects of technology is it teaches you to multitask. Okay. And some people think multitasking is a positive. They think there's a sort of net benefit to the way you use your time for multitasking, because theoretically you're able to do 3 or 4 things at once. There are 2 things that are wrong with that. One is it's wrong because the science tells you the opposite. Actually, if you analyze how effective people are when they're multitasking and how effective they are when they're concentrating, the productivity of a human being is higher when they're concentrating than when they are multitasking. So the productivity of multitasking is a myth, number one. Number two, in an AI-dominated world where computers and robots will take away what I call the more basic work and leave only more complex work for human beings, who may be the only people at that point that can do that work, is it sensible, when the skill set you need to undertake complex work is to be able to deep attend to a conversation, deep watch a piece of video, deep listen to a piece of music or text, deep read some text, to be teaching youngsters at that very moment to be multitaskers? I think the 2 are inconsistent. And I think that could be a growing problem over time. I think we do need to remind ourselves that to do complex work effectively, we need to be able to focus and concentrate. And what technology does is distract us from that focus and concentration.
So moving away from the workplace a bit, I'd like to talk about the impact on sleep. So obviously having a high screen time, all of that blue light is definitely going to impact your sleep, and that goes on to impact education, etc. And a lot of long-term illnesses are also related to sleep. As you mentioned before, it's quite easy to, start scrolling on TikTok at 11 p.m. and it ends up being 2 a.m. and you don't know what you did for the last 3 hours of your life. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a real problem. So just before COVID started, the World Health Organization, which of course has now become somewhat more famous even than it was before, had declared that there was a global sleep loss epidemic because of technology. It's just a fact that most people use their phone just before they go to bed. Indeed, 60% of people sleep with the phone. I think 80% of people say the last thing they do before they put the light out is actually to look at their device. And as you mentioned, the problem with that is you're sending blue light into your brain, which has the effect of telling you to wake up. So just at the moment when you're trying to sleep, you're actually giving your brain a sort of message to wake up. Secondly, I agree with you that very often that time in that hour, or can be 3 or 4 hours for some kids, that they spend just mindlessly, scrolling through social media, is probably very unproductive and also potentially very negative just at the moment you're trying to go to sleep. And what that results in is exactly what you'd expect. It results in anxiety, it results in depression, it results in tired kids the following day, it results in people trying to study when they're drowsy. It actually involves a lot of car accidents because people drive when they're tired. And by the way, I'm not making this up. This is what surveys tell you. And there are organizations who have very closely studied specifically the benefits and benefits of sleep and the problems of not enough sleep, and have looked at the effect of technology on sleep. So this is a massive problem. And think about it, we spend more time on screens than we do either studying or sleeping. As I said, we've got to get out of this habit of taking our phones not only into the bedroom but into the bed, and using it last thing at night. What the professionals will tell you is simply do not look at a device for the last hour before you try and go to sleep, because your sleep will be infinitely better. And if you wake up in the middle of the night, which many of us sadly do, for God's sake, don't look at your device, because you are literally telling your brain, just as you would if you opened the curtain and it was bright outside, to wake up, which is the last thing you want to be telling your brain at 4 o'clock in the morning.
Right. I mean, we have talked a lot about the negatives now, and obviously your book very much focuses on the negatives of social media. But at the same time, you have very clearly said initially, you're not against tech, and you're definitely not against social media in general. So what are the upsides? What are the positives? And do the positives outweigh the negatives at the moment?
So the reason I wrote the book, excuse me, sorry, terrible hay fever. The reason I wrote the book was because I wanted to give your generation the provocation and the tools to reset your relationship with technology. If you can control the technology rather than it controlling you, then we will have a much better balance. You'll use it for what you need and what you want rather than what they want you to want. So that's really what my book is about. There are so many potential benefits from technology, but there are also huge risks and dangers. And it's just educating people actually to realize what's good and bad about the internet, what's good and bad about their devices, and then to be more disciplined in doing what's good and doing less of what's bad.
Cool. All right, Pristy, any other questions from your side, or?
No, I think that was all the questions I had.
Cool. In that case, Bob, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you to everyone else for watching. Obviously, having read the book by myself, I can highly recommend it to give it a read. We have a link to the book right in the description below. Check it out. And thank you very much for joining. See you soon.
Thank you for having me, Pristy. Thank you for having me, Lucas. And just to say that any profits from the book go to adolescent wellbeing charities. So you can either, I think you've got the link, but you can either buy it through my own website, where all the money goes to charity, which is www.robertwigley.uk, or of course it's on Amazon Kindle or Audible, where sadly most of the money goes to Amazon. But anyway, there we go. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank
Bye.
you.